This is the story of a little girl who was so rich she grew up never knowing who to trust. In the end, that may have killed her. Newport, Rhode Island, playground for America's super rich, home for one of the world's richest women, richer even than the Queen.
Doris definitely felt as much as the money had been a blessing, it was a curse.
Doris Duke was the only child of America's greatest tobacco baron. When she was born, the newspapers christened her the richest little girl in the world.
She actually considered life had almost cheated her. One time I joked, I said, "Just think, Doris, you wanted to be a comedian, you wanted to be a dancer, you wanted to be a musician. Instead, you're a billionaire."
She had the same type of media coverage in the newspapers as Jackie Onassis would have, Jackie Kennedy would have much later, and Madonna would have, and Princess Di has today. She was always on the pages of the papers. She was a real celebrity circa 1930.
But Doris was the most reluctant of celebrities. For over 50 years, she sought to avoid the glare of publicity. She hid from the world's cameras and never gave interviews. When she died in October 1993, without family or friends near at her Beverly Hills mansion, her billion-dollar legacy was left in the sole control of her butler, an Irish semi-literate alcoholic, Bernard Lafferty. Now the headlines cried, "Murder mystery." It was ironic that in death, the reclusive Doris became the focus of the world's attention again.
I firmly believe Miss Duke was murdered.
There's no doubt in my mind that Miss Duke died a long time before she should have, and that she was murdered.
The last will of Miss Duke was an absolute fraud and phony.
It was a sad end for the little girl who had been the apple of her father's eye. The Duke family fortune was made from the tobacco fields of North Carolina. With a total asset of 50 cents, Washington Duke, Doris's grandfather, created a cartel with other local farmers at the end of the American Civil War. His next ambition formed the smoking habits of a nation.
With the help of a young inventor that he'd met, I believe, in the service, I started making cigarettes, and that led to the formation of the American Tobacco Company and the whole fortune.
Probably by the early 70s, Washington Duke was a millionaire from his tobacco business. And the business was carried on by his two younger sons, Ben and Buck, but particularly Buck, Doris's father, James B. Duke, went on to actually become the greatest tobacco baron in American history.
Buck Duke was a gruff entrepreneur who smoked 24 cigars a day and considered business his mistress. "I loved it better than anything else," he said. Like the other barons of industry at the turn of the century, Buck began to put his name and money to worthy institutions. In Durham, North Carolina, Trinity College became Duke University on receipt of some $40 million. Aged 50, Buck married Nanaline Holt Inman, a divorcee from Atlanta, Georgia. She completed his fortune when in 1912 she gave birth to a daughter. They called her Doris. Buck was determined his little girl would want for nothing.
Her father had opted for opulence after 1912, and he built a very fine mansion on Fifth Avenue. He built a very elaborate estate in New Jersey. He had a big house in Charlotte, North Carolina. He had certainly taken to living in what we would call a grand style. Now, she being an only child, she was brought up in all these houses with all these servants and all this magnificence. No brothers and sisters, and a strict regimen. Mr. Duke had a fetish about health. Everything had to be clean and germ-free, and her mother had a fetish about how she was dressed, how she was washed.
Buck wanted nothing to threaten his little princess. Even family servants were given medicals to check they were germ-free. But her parents' marriage became strained. Buck was besotted with his little girl. He named his 80-foot yacht after her, and his private Pullman car.
He really loved to have her with him a lot, and he used to take her on the train with him where he'd go anywhere. She was known to have sat on his lap during directors' meetings and times when big decisions were being tossed around. I'm told that if anybody objected to that, who happened to be attending any of those meetings, that it would be wiser of them to say nothing, to let it be. Apparently one man did raise an objection once, and he was promptly ejected from the meeting, and most likely from my great-uncle's life. That's how close, how much he loved her.
Her mother had a son from a previous marriage, and Doris always felt she came second in Nanoline's affections.
When she talked about her mother, she would immediately go, and you just see this cold facade, stone cold. You could almost feel ice. Her eyes would change. She had sort of this almost stiffness in her entire body. When we went to the mansion where she was born, Fifth Avenue, she took me down one time and she was showing me where she used to hide her dolls that her mother thought were not proper. And she made a little garden for her baby dolls of leaves and so on and so forth. And her mother thought it was sick and dirty and somewhat macabre because everything, I guess, Doris created looked like a funeral. But I think that probably was subconsciously a death wish for her mother.
But it wasn't her mother who was to die. On October the 10th, 1925, Buck Duke died of pneumonia. It was the coldest October on record, yet Nanoline had ordered the heating be turned off. Her first words on leaving Buck's deathbed were reputedly, "Put the heating back on." Doris only learnt of his death when her mother told the maid to dye the child's clothes black. A week later, it was revealed that Buck had left the bulk of his fortune to Doris, along with the warning that was to rule the rest of her life.
He basically told her, they're only going to be there for the money. Don't trust anyone. It's probably one of the worst things you could tell a 12-year-old girl, because Doris, in one sense, really never grew past that 12-year-old girl who was frightened that everybody would be looking for her money.
Doris was never to forget her father's words. When Buck was buried, so too was her childhood.
Doris was known all over the place, except to people who were close to her, as the richest little girl in the world. Tough title, and one that really did, in a sense, serve to separate her and possibly drive her into a more, in a sense, individualistic or secretive path where she felt at least that she was commanding her own destiny.
Her mother had only been left a modest trust fund. It made their relationship unequal and even more awkward. Aged 14, Doris had to sue her mother to stop her from selling family assets. She won. Later, when Doris wanted to go to college, her high society mother forbade it and took her on the grand tour of Europe. In London, Doris made her society debut and found herself presented at Buckingham Palace.
I think Doris wanted to be a part and felt she was a part of American high society, but she wanted to be a part of it on her own terms. She shunned her debut, for instance. She wasn't or didn't want to be a debutante, which was sort of ahead of her time, because young ladies of her age group were all debutantes.
Poor little rich girl. Those pesky newsmen just won't.
At the
leave
time
her
of the
alone.
Great Depression, the lives of the wealthy held a morbid fascination for the American public. Barbara Hutton, the Woolworth heiress, and Doris were born a week apart and nicknamed the Gold Dust Twins. While Barbara delighted in the press coverage, Doris ran from it. Then, aged 22, Doris surprised everyone when she married an aspiring politician, 16 years her senior.
My understanding of why she married Jimmy Cromwell was that the marriage was heavily promoted by Jimmy Cromwell's mother for reasons of a good match. In other words, I think Mrs. Stotesbury was running out of money and saw that as a good thing for her son. I've always heard she got married to get out of the house, get out from under her mother.
The newlyweds set off on their honeymoon, but all thoughts of romance disappeared when on her wedding night, her father's words came back to haunt her.
He asked, well, what kind of allowance can I expect? And that was that, you know, she knew this isn't love, this is all about my money.
Doris refused to sleep with her husband that first night. He began to call her the frigid heiress. Their 2-year round-the-world honeymoon began in a sober mood. Yet it was on this trip that Doris began a lifelong love of Eastern and Oriental culture.
Doris, on her honeymoon with James Cromwell, was traveling basically around the world, and she would stop in different places and she'd go, I like that room, have it disassembled and shipped to me. So she did that, I think, in Tunisia and Persia, India, and when she got to Hawaii, she realized this is the place to put it together.
In an attempt to rebuild their marriage, Doris and Cromwell built this house. She called it Shangri-La, after the mythical land where no one grows old. For a while, they were happy. But Jimmy always had another agenda: politics.
Social news. To Pasadena Government Homestead Project comes Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt and 25-year-old Doris Duke Cromwell.
Doris tried to support her husband's political ambitions and campaigned for him, but it was her the press pursued. It seemed that Doris could not escape her title, nor her husband's continual demands for money. When in 1939 Cromwell was finally appointed as minister to Canada, Doris went too, but not for long. She returned to Hawaii and to the freedom and anonymity she had enjoyed there. She became close to 2 Hawaiian brothers, Sam and Duke Kahanamoku.
She loved the Kahanamokos. I mean, she might have loved a couple of them too much, but or not enough. But she had real friends there.
Duke Kahanamoku is fond of taking friends for a trip to ride the breakers onto the shore.
He was a former Olympic swimming champion, but his first love was surfing. He taught Doris. She became one of the first white women to surf, winning herself a preferred title. Now living apart from Cromwell, Doris's behavior and indiscreet affairs scandalized society. In Hollywood, with the likes of Errol Flynn, and in London, with a British Member of Parliament, Alec Cunningham Reid. When, aged 27, Doris became pregnant, Cromwell knew the baby was not his. There were rumors the father was either Duke or Sam Kahanamoku, or Alec Cunningham Reid. Doris whimsically suggested that the child was the result of a one-night stand on a long train journey. Her little girl, Arden, was born 3 months premature. She weighed just 3 pounds and was clinging to life.
She told me that's when she discovered her healing powers, that they had her so sedated. And when they took the child from her, she tried to reach out and grab it and say, no. She said, I couldn't get it out of my throat. She was really like this, and she was telling me. And she said, because I felt if I just touched that child, I could heal it.
Arden died less than 24 hours later. Doris was devastated. Told by doctors that she would be unable to have children ever again, she hired psychics to try and contact her dead child. Their relationship finally over, Doris and Cromwell divorced. He asked for $7 million. He didn't get it. With war raging in Europe, Doris assisted the Merchant Marine. Then, with the help of her friend Tex McCrary, she became a foreign correspondent. Reporting from Austria, Doris met another friend, General George Patton.
Patton stopped still and said, "My God, Doris, what are you doing here?" He embraced her, practically picked her up, took her over, introduced her to the Russians. I picked Doris up 3-4 days later. Patton had said she was a brave American working girl. There was no richest girl in the world, any of that stuff at all.
After the war, Doris met a Dominican playboy and sometime diplomat, Porfirio Rubirosa. It was said he'd been a hitman for his ex-father-in-law, dictator General Trujillo. It was also said that he had an 11-inch penis. Doris was entranced by him.
He was very suave, very polite, very attractive to women. I think everything in his reputation is well earned.
Because Doris's wealth was so vast, the US government was concerned that if Rubirosa took up his old profession, he might inherit it all. They drew up the couple's prenuptial agreement and presented it on the wedding day. Rubirosa is said to have fainted when he saw it.
Porfirio was a man of tremendous charm. I think that if the press is right and he cost her $1 million, I think she had a lot of fun for her money.
Their marriage lasted a whole year.
Ruby was a great lover. Doris loved sex. Ruby provided that. Though she was upset, she did say she was upset. And I said, because you bought and paid for him and he wasn't faithful, right? Namaste Narasimhaya.
Doris was never to marry again and began to seek out the things that money cannot buy.
We all have this internal urge to find God, to find ourselves, to find what it's all about. And that was definitely Doris's quest. She had everything else.
Doris used her money to travel the world communing with the likes of Indian mystics, African witch doctors, and Tibetan lamas. This is rare footage of Doris in Kenya, one of many places she visited during a lifetime of spiritual quests.
Doris was a firm believer in reincarnation. She, in a previous life, was a blind beggar in India. And because of being blind, it gave her a musical ability in this life. So she was fascinated by all that.
But in this life, Doris did not want to grow old.
Doris was always in search of the fountain of youth. She took Chinese herbs. She did Reiki. Doris was scurrying around in India in little hole-in-the-walls getting Ayurvedic medicine from little guys in little huts, you know, and stuff like that.
Doris wanted to probably be a singer, a musician, a historian, a philanthropist. But I think she was, you know, always searching for some new goal. And a lot of times the quest is more important than the goal. She's, you know, I guess sort of like hunting for the Holy Grail. Something you know you're not going to find, but you keep looking all the same.
Walker Inman Jr., her orphaned nephew, was Doris's closest relation. Age 12, he had come to live with her.
I don't know what family meant to her. I don't even think she had a concept of it. I think it had been lost so long ago.
Walker was a wild teenager, and at first, theirs was a difficult relationship.
The story is that Doris was in the swimming pool one day, and Walker had a hand grenade. Well, it was a dud hand grenade, but still it was a hand grenade, and he pulled the pin and threw it in the swimming pool. It didn't go off, but it created a minor stir.
I don't know how many really good friends she had in this world, and I don't think she knew the one she had. She had a great taste of antiques, but had poor character judgment.
Her longest relationship was with Joe Castro, a jazz musician almost half her age. It was another turbulent on-off affair, as unsatisfactory as the rest.
I don't think she ever trusted anyone, myself included. There was times of doubt, and that was the most painful part of the relationship. But you accepted that as part of Doris.
It seemed that her father's warning to trust no one would overshadow Doris's life forever. And there was more tragedy ahead. In 1966, Doris Duke, the richest woman in the world, was leaving her Newport estate with a close friend, Eduardo Tirella. He went to open the gate.
The logical thing was for the gates to open and her to drive in, and he would then do the opposite and close them. And she pressed the wrong pedal and pressed the accelerator instead of the brake at one moment and crushed him against the gates.
Doris was traumatized by Tirella's death and hurt by accusations that she was drunk, or even that she had done it deliberately. She sought to atone.
I think she then did this wonderful thing that he'd been very interested in, the 17th and 18th century houses in Newport. And she then made this a very major project of her own and founded the Restoration Society.
Over the next 25 years, Doris spent millions of dollars and personally oversaw the restoration of many of the old wooden houses in Newport. She was as individual in the way she chose to spend her money as she was in the way she lived her life.
When one went to dinner at Doris's, it was very informal. You certainly didn't dress up. In a huge dining room, I mean, I certainly saw it, but I don't think it had been used in 40 years. Then you would go to where she dined, which was a sort of little niche under the main stairs. And the butler would come in and serve you, and, I mean, you would find that you would very quietly be drinking a wine that would, in a restaurant, be costing £500 a bottle, if not more. No fuss, you know, probably with scrambled eggs to go with it.
Doris's lifestyle was the lifestyles in the rich and famous multiplied about 10 times.
She had 5 different homes, and each home was fully staffed. The farm in New Jersey had the most employees. I guess there were 150 employees.
I had some paintings that she was storing for me up in Newport, and she'd gotten those down. And in the process, had found a Rembrandt she had. They didn't know about it. It had been put in the house probably at the turn of the century. And it was kind of, you know, oh, I found a Rembrandt today. Oh, that's nice, Doris.
Doris was definitely like a queen in a European court. Pages coming in and out, you know, servants coming in and out, her court jester, her cook, and everything revolved around what Doris wanted. And it didn't matter how crazy it was. If Doris wanted something, it was yes, Miss Duke.
The maid couldn't find her favorite watch, which was this $20 yellow Timex watch. And in all of the panic about the watch, President Ronald Reagan called to talk to her about something, and she just left him on hold.
There's only one difference between crazy people and eccentric people. The eccentric people have money. It's like thinking you're Napoleon, but you have the money to hire an army to prove it.
Although as shrewd with money as her father, she increased his fortune 4-fold. Doris's real passion was for the arts. Her taste was eclectic, from collecting priceless Oriental and Islamic treasures in Shangri-La to housing a complete Thai village in her New Jersey home. At weekends, She sang in a white wig with a black gospel choir. Another passion was belly dancing.
Doris wanted to be one of us. Sometimes when we'd be rehearsing with all the dancers, she'd always refer to us as we dancers.
Through her teacher, Robert Farrer, Doris met another dancer who was to have a dramatic effect on her life, a 32-year-old Hare Krishna devotee, Shandy Hefner.
She always talked about how awful wealth was, and supposedly she came from a wealthy family. That's the impression she gave all of us. And we were talking, and I said something about Doris, and she said, oh, I'd love to go see that house. And I thought, my God, what's this child want to see that house where she hates all that wealth?
Shandy had been living for the last 15 years in the Krishna communities of Hawaii. Doris began to believe that she had known Shandy in a previous life, and that she was the reincarnation of her daughter, Arden, who had died more than 40 years earlier.
I don't know if it's obvious from the photographs, but when I'd see the two of them together, it was like two peas in a pod. Shandy was a lot like Doris. You know, she could actually be a loving, you know, caring person, spiritual seeker, and on the other hand, she could be a cruel bitch.
Their relationship gave Doris a new lease of life. They became inseparable, and after 3 years, Doris legally adopted her. Aged 78, she had a daughter at last, someone to trust.
From the morning after Miss Duke adopted Shandy Hefner, it was like night and day. She became an absolute tyrant. The true Shandy was unleashed, and she became impossible. She'd come down in the middle of the night with the dogs and open up all of the cabinets in the kitchen, and the kitchens are enormous. She would take the food and throw it all on the floor. So all of the food, thousands of dollars worth of food from the refrigerators, from the cabinets, would all be strewn all over the kitchen floor for whoever would come down in the morning to see it first.
In the beginning, Doris knew none of this. She and Shandy traveled everywhere together on her Boeing 737. Shandy then unwittingly introduced a rival into the household. Bernard Lafferty was from a poor background in County Donegal. Uneducated and with a weakness for the bottle, he became Doris's butler. Within a few weeks, he was found naked and unconscious, surrounded by Grand Marnier bottles. He promised to reform, and soon developed a fixation with his employer.
There were times when Miss Duke would want to talk to me about a menu for a dinner she might be having a couple of days in advance, and he'd follow me up to her room, you know, pleading with me for me to tell Miss Duke how wonderful Bernard is and how he adores her. And I would like look at him saying, this is crazy. You know, Bernard, she wants to talk about, you know, a lobster souffle and an herb salad. I'd leave the room and he'd be, what did she say about me? What did you tell her? And I realized he was a little unstable then.
It really was a traveling circus. There was no motlier a crew than the group of people that worked for Miss Duke, and that included us. I have no qualms in saying that. It was just such an odd collection of people.
This is like some kind of bizarre sitcom. We've got our Hare Krishna astrologer here. We got our, you know, ponytail, diamond earring butler. And we got our 300-pound Fijian maid. We got our crazy New York cook. And Doris Duke as herself. This would be a great show.
The last character to join the cast was James Burns, a Duke bodyguard who caught Shandy's eye. But their romance was to upset the butler.
Bernard was primarily concerned about James getting a foot in the door because there was a rivalry between them. Bernard wanted to be the little confidant, but Shandy Hefner and James Burns made fun of him behind his back.
When I crossed my bridge over to becoming more involved with Duke affairs and sitting there and having dinner with Doris and Shandy every evening, and Lafferty had to serve me, I could feel an air of animosity.
He's sitting at the table, and definitely he's looking at being Mr. Duke. He's looking at it. Shandy's, I mean, you can read the wills. Probably, you know, it's basically all Shandy's. Doris passes away, it's Chandi's to do what she decides to do with it. Doris was trying to accept him as a son, but at the same time, it was jealousy, you know? In other words, here's somebody who's now taking Chandi away from Doris.
Doris became mysteriously unwell at this time, and later, when she took a fall, Bernard saw his opportunity.
Bernard had been telling her that the two of us were planning or plotting to do away with her. It had been placed in her head that I may have pushed her, and that the two young people would want to get rid of her and just share her money.
One of Doris's doctors told her that Chandi was using cocaine, was basically a cokehead. She'd done so much coke, her septum was deviated, and that somebody, and making it look like it was Chandi, was slipping her something and was poisoning her.
There were some tests done on sherry that she had been drinking that winter in Honolulu that had traces of rat poison in it.
He later got her so paranoid that she just one day picked up and packed up and got on her private jet and flew out to Los Angeles without saying a word to anyone.
Oh, Bernard was happy as a pig in shit. When Chandi was gone, it was kind of like, ding dong, the witch is dead.
Although the allegations were unproven, Doris fled with Lafferty to her Beverly Hills home. She'd broken her cardinal rule. She had trusted and felt let down. She sank into a deep depression.
She wouldn't get out of bed. She wouldn't allow the curtains to be opened in the morning. She refused to eat. I felt Bernard was responsible for her depression in that he kept driving home the point of the mistake Miss Duke had made in adopting Chandi.
He would have these grandiose visions of Chandi Hefner coming after him with a gun, and he really believed these things.
She loved Chandi, and even after Chandi was banished from Shangri-La, Doris would always ask, you heard anything about Chandi? You heard anything about James? You know? And it hurt, you know, but Doris had been somebody who'd been told, don't trust anyone, and once they show their colors, she could just cut it off, even though her heart was still, she basically, in one sense, was still in love with Chandi, but...
Doris was never to speak to or see Chandi again, and Bernard began to take control of her life.
Bernard very aggressively decided who could and couldn't get through to Miss Duke, and if he didn't want somebody to be in touch with her, he would give them, make up reasons as to why she couldn't come to the phone, and he wouldn't give the messages to Miss Duke.
I couldn't get her on the telephone. I'd written her a couple of letters saying, let's get together, and there was a sort of a vacuum of response.
She's not the kind of person that's listed in the phone book. She didn't go pick up her mail, so she was fairly isolated. And whoever her confidant was that week, sometimes she would be swayed that way.
Isolated in her Beverly Hills home, Doris was swayed enough to make Bernard a co-executor of her will with Walker Inman.
And that's when Lafferty brought in new doctors that she had never met before, and that was the beginning of the end of Miss Doris Duke.
Doris, now 79, was encouraged by Bernard to have another facelift. The plastic surgeon was to be Dr. Harry Glassman, reportedly recommended by Bernard, and married to the actress Victoria Principal. Soon after the operation, Doris fell and broke her hip. Glassman introduced top society doctor Charles Kivovitz. Bernard was then given Doris's medical power of attorney and took control of the household.
He wanted to be able to tell who to do what and when, and ended up, I don't know whether Miss Duke gave him that power or not, or whether he just took it, because he wrote a letter to the business office stating that Miss Duke had given him the right to look at all the faxes and okay all the procedures and blah, blah, blah. So we were never quite sure that Miss Duke herself had actually initiated these things.
9 months later, against friends' advice, Doris was persuaded by those around her to replace both her arthritic knees. It was a major operation.
There were other factors that came into play, such as you're going to be able to wear mini skirts and all this, vain silliness that would have appealed to her because she really did. She wanted to present herself as being this vigorous young person. She did not want to be an old lady.
The operation was not a success. Instead of restoring her youth, she became confined to a wheelchair. She was becoming increasingly frail and disorientated.
She woke up one morning and thought she was in Brooklyn. And we thought that was the craziest thing because here's a woman who's been all over the world, visited the most exotic places, and of all the places in the world to wake up, why Brooklyn? We couldn't figure this out. So we ended up using that as the sort of euphemism for Miss Duke is not mentally all here today.
In the spring of 1993, Doris returned to hospital. Anne and Colin were summoned there by Bernard to witness Doris sign a will drawn up by lawyers she'd hired days earlier. The firm, represented by Bill Doyle, was recommended by Dr. Glassman.
She didn't know, who most of these people in the room were. They were strangers. She seemed very fearful and upset.
Bill Doyle put the will on her lap, and she kind of looked over, and she started trying to sign, and she just stopped, couldn't do it. And then he immediately jumped in and said, well, let me help you. He lifted the will up, put a briefcase underneath it, and put his hand under her hand to guide her along to sign. If he hadn't done that motion of pushing her hand, she wouldn't have been able to sign that will. It could be said of him that he was just helping a slightly sick woman because she didn't have the strength on her own to move her hand. She was not there. She was in Brooklyn. And Bernard and Nuku, I can't stress this enough, how many times that morning they said she was in Brooklyn and that she was just whacked.
Doris had signed a will which gave her butler sole control of her billion-dollar estate. By the summer of 1993, Doris Duke was in decline. She had made her butler, Bernard Lafferty, sole executor of her billion-dollar estate. It saw a dramatic change in their relationship, as was later claimed in affidavits.
Bernard began to avoid Miss Duke after the will was signed in his favor more and more. He was very impatient. He didn't want to be bothered with her.
There were some nurses that would medicate Miss Duke. The code word around the house for it was Pearl's cocktail.
They had inserted a feeding tube so that she would get proper nutrients, and what they would have Pearl do is make up her cocktail, which was champagne and Valium, and pour it in the G-tube so that the alcohol would heighten the effect of the Valium and basically knock her out, so she wouldn't be asking for Bernard. He did not want to deal with her.
That meant that he could be out shopping for a few hours without having to call again. Oh, he went into Armani and had suits made for every day of the year. And he'd always buy clothes a little too small for him. He was in denial about his weight. At one point, the room in the playhouse that he stayed in was floor-to-ceiling shopping bags. The accounting has shown that he spent $1 million of her money buying clothes and knickknacks. Elizabeth Taylor was being sent flowers by Lafferty so frequently that her major domo at her house contacted Anne and said quietly, "Would you please stop sending her flowers? It's too much."
At this point in his life, he had taken on, I believe mentally, the mantle of Miss Duke. He believed that he was her designated successor. He believed that he was to be Miss Duke.
In July, Bernard's actions took a sinister turn when he refused to call an ambulance as Doris choked on a piece of food.
This is choking to death. This woman has had a stroke and he doesn't want anybody to call. He was very sick, and as time progressed, the feeling got so creepy, you know, realizing what Bernard was trying to do, which was to kill her.
After a summer in and out of hospital, Doris returned to Falconlair in September. She was never to leave the house again. Her physician, Dr. Kidovitz, was given a check for $10,000. Plastic surgeon Dr. Glassman, $500,000.
These gifts have all the earmarks of someone who is feathering his own nest, who is building his own future, and not something that Doris Duke was doing. Totally out of character for Miss Duke.
Her bedroom now resembled an intensive care unit, yet despite 24-hour nursing, Doris was suffering from neglect, as Anne discovered.
I got my hands behind her head, and her hair was baby fine, and it was this sickening, greasy, dandruff-ridden rat's nest clumped up against her head so tightly that I couldn't even get my fingers to her scalp. I had to get the comb with the long tines and stick it in there to get that itch. And I confronted the day nurse, Joy. I said, "Joy, why is her hair like that?" And Joy was like, "Well, you know, she was so sick, we thought she was gonna die." And as Joy was stammering this excuse out, Bernard was coming up the stairs and heard this. And he came up to me and grabbed the bottles out of my hand and said, "Well, if Madam wants to be difficult this morning, I'll give her something to be difficult about." And I just stood there and thought he turned everything around. So half an hour to 45 minutes later, I thought, you better check on what's going on down there. And I went down there, and I stood and I could see down the hall. She was sitting in the wheelchair, kind of slumped like this. I could see her from behind. Joy had the basin under her head, and Bernard was ripping the comb through her hair, so her head was going back like that. And I thought, you know, there's nothing I can do. I'm stuck. They're gonna kill her. This is it.
In early October, after a consultation with his patient, Dr. Kidovitz gave instructions that Doris was to be given hospice care only. "Do not resuscitate" was recorded on her medical chart. She was put on a heavy sedation program.
She's not in any pain, and yet she's put on Demerol. The nurse's notes say that she's recovered substantially from some of the earlier problems she's had. This is a woman on the mend who's now given drugs when she's under no pain at all.
Well, she had executed several living wills in several different states, wherever she might fear that she might end up if she was ill, in which she authorized those physicians who were treating her, if in fact she was terminally ill, gave them permission to use whatever means necessary in terms of medication and treatment to keep her pain-free and comfortable.
I increased the morphine so that she would not linger, that she would not suffer, and ultimately that she would die perhaps shortly or sooner than she would have otherwise died from her medical conditions, which I judged within a 48-hour period were of a terminal nature.
It was unusual that on the evening of October the 27th, when Dr. Kidovitz was away, a package of drugs arrived at the house.
Lafferty was sitting in a rocking chair in the dining area of the kitchen, and when he heard who it was from, he jumped up from the chair and and grabbed the package from my hand and told me that Miss Duke was going to die tonight.
Over the next 12 hours, Doris was given high levels of morphine. At her bedside were Bernard, her maid Nuku, and Bill Doyle, her lawyer.
Miss Duke, who has never come up out of this drug-induced stupor, who has never been awakened to say, won't you sign here, or by your leave, could we do this, is lying unconscious in her own estate, without visitors, with her mail being intercepted, with her butler, Bernard Lafferty, consulting with the doctor and giving the authorizations, and the morphine is coming, drip, 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 and as it drips, her breathing is getting shorter and shorter until it does exactly what every medical doctor knows it will do with that much morphine. The morphine continues, and the breathing stopped, and Miss Duke is dead.
Doris Duke died on October the 28th, 1993, a few weeks short of her 81st birthday.
Lafferty made lots of phone calls to family members of Miss Duke, old friends of Miss Duke, members of the press, and when he got these people on the line, he would be sobbing and you know, unconsolable about, oh, how he loved her, and oh, what's he going to do without her, blah, blah, blah. And then he'd hang up the phone and be completely composed.
The butler called me and told me she had died. I was out here in Wyoming. And said I'd like to come back, you know, fly over and say goodbye. Well, when I got there, I was informed that she had already been cremated the next morning.
How did you feel about that?
I was not very happy. I figured they could at least wait, you know, more than 4 or 5 hours.
No autopsy was ever done, and Bernard scattered her ashes into the Pacific Ocean in sight of Shangri-La. No friends or family invited. The ex-butler was now in charge of one of the world's largest charitable foundations. It was to prove too much for the poor boy from Donegal.
Bernard began to dye his hair Doris Duke blonde, get it lighter and lighter and lighter. He was dyeing his eyebrows, he was dyeing his eyelashes, he was having French manicures. He was going the whole 9 yards.
He went to a dressmaker in Beverly Hills and had very ornate robes made, and he bought a throne. He claimed that he was a queen without a country.
Bernard began to sleep in Doris's beds, to remodel her homes, and above all, to spend her money.
He was seeing himself as being the beneficiary, not the executor and trustee, but the beneficiary of the Duke estate, and he was going to take advantage of that. At the same time, he's making these friends with movie stars. He's bringing himself into society. He's announced that the new king has been crowned. Here's the new Mr. Duke, the reigning prince of this estate.
Occasionally, he spent Doris Duke's money in accordance with her wishes, as with Duke University.
It's very nice to be here today, and I think Miss Duke is looking down upon all of us. I would like to present a check to the president of Duke University, Nan Cohen, in the amount of $10.5 million.
Bernard's reign came to an end when a former Duke doctor and Duke employees claimed that he had manipulated Doris into changing her will in his favor. But the bombshell came when one of her deathbed nurses, Tammy Payette, alleged that Doris had been murdered by Bernard and Dr. Kivovitz. She was later jailed for stealing jewelry from her patients, including Doris. Though there was no evidence for her allegations, her action led to an investigation by a New York judge who found Bernard unfit to run such an important charity. Bernard relinquished his position in return for a settlement of $5 million and $500,000 a year for life. He retreated to Los Angeles and bought a $2 million house in sight of Falcon Lair. He painted it Doris Duke yellow and hired his own butler. But he seemed to have lost his purpose in life, and with his heavy drinking, his weight ballooned to over 18 stone. Bernard missed Doris Duke. 3 years and a week to the day after Doris died, Bernard, aged 51, also died. He was buried in his favorite Armani jacket. He willed everything back to the Doris Duke Foundation.
Looking at it in perspective, you can say that the fortune hunters didn't get any of the fortune, and the butler, God rest his soul, didn't get any either. So didn't work out that anybody stole any money. The fortune's intact.
There's karma with that money. You don't just get to enjoy it. The curse comes along with it. So I don't, now that Bernard is passed on, those people who are now, and everybody's still fighting over the state. So-and-so's suing this, and so-and-so's suing that, and everybody's vying to get, like vultures. They're practically like vultures hovering around trying to pick the carcass. But I can, like they say, okay, you can have it, and choke on it.
She's been there, she's done that. She's seen times in history and been parts of it. It's a gone era. I have a couple of photos of her, but I don't like to keep them on the walls or around, because it's sort of like saying goodbye, and I don't want to say goodbye yet.